Hello, my name is Leticia Greyling. I am with the university, Rhodes University, and the business school in South Africa called Rhodes Business School. I hope everyone can hear me. Let me quickly have just a check. Can you hear me? Yes, seems like we're all good. Hopefully everyone can see the first slide. I deal with sustainability and strategy in the business school, teach on our MBA program and our executive courses, and look forward to sharing this session with all of you guys. We will have questions and that at the end, so I can toggle between the different views and that. So please keep them handy, and you're welcome to ask them at the end. And then I think we can start. So slide number 2 just talks about the session that we're going to be covering. We're going to be looking at understanding this term ecology, since the webinar is around ecology and business. We're going to deal with some nice new interesting terms like ecosystem services, and then also looking at impacts, how eco footprint, biocapacity, and things that business students are quite familiar with, things like creditors and debtors, but now we're going to look at it from an ecological perspective. We will then also be looking at some key responses, mainly from a business perspective, but also from an innovation perspective. I hope you guys can all see that. Slide number 2. Since it's an introductory webinar only, we're only going to be touching on very few concepts and ideas and some cases, and won't go into too much detail. It's quite a lengthy discussion topic, which can go on for days and days and days, and we do full modules on this, but this is just a quick little introductory session. We're going to start with understanding ecology, this fancy word ecology, which sometimes we confuse in them. I'm going to start with, on slide number 4, something that we all know. Each of us are familiar with the human body. And of course, we sometimes just see it as a person on the outside. But of course, understanding the human body is the same as understanding how human body systems work. So you get your circulation system where blood flows, you get your nervous system, where all your nerves work together and helps you to link with the brain. You get your respiration system that helps you to breathe. You get your digestive system that helps with digesting food, eating, and survival. And then, of course, your skeletal system, which is the bones in your body that keeps you up and running. But just like in the human body, these systems, even though they are individual systems, work together as well. If there is something wrong in your muscles, for instance, which is another body system, then that might impact how your bones start aching or not aching. If you have problems breathing, that might also impact how your digestive system can function or not function. Now, exactly the same happens when we look at the environment. We tend to think about it as quite isolated little bit. So we think about the environment and we think about trees, perhaps. On slide 6, you can see what we're looking at. There's just a picture of trees. We might think of grass, flowers, anything like that. That's the plants. We, of course, also think about animals. Coming from South Africa and on our continent, we have, of course, the pride that is the lion and little cubs. We also think about things that are maybe not living, like a river. It is water, very required in the environment. And we might even think about the environment as the ocean. Large expanse, about 70% of our planet takes that up. But of course, when we talk about ecology, it's the combination of all of those things. The plants and the animals, their interaction with water. So we refer to all of those things in ecology. Not just the individual plants and animals, the people, as you can see there, even the insects and the microorganisms, the birds, the weather, all of that is linked from an ecosystem perspective or from an ecology perspective. So very simply put, we have non-living things like water, like rocks, all of those things, and then living things where you have plants, you have animals, and then you all have that as part together in what we call ecology or the ecosystem. So on slide number 9, you will be able to see some very basic definitions. These refer to ecology and ecosystem, and you can see it's basically the same thing. We use these two words interchangeably. Ecology refers to, or ecological science, is simply when we scientifically study how animals, living organisms, so it's animals and plants, microorganisms, insects, all of them, how they are distributed, so where they occur, and their abundance, how many of them there are. And also how their distribution and abundance, so where they occur and how many there are, could be affected by interactions between these organisms and the environment. So again, ecology is not just about plants and animals, but it's about the interactions with each other, but also their interaction with the environment, which is similar to our definition for the ecosystem, which talks about it's simply a complex of living organisms, their physical environment, so the soil, the water, the air, and their interrelationships in a particular space, a particular unit of space. So I hope that makes sense, because that really helps us understand the difference between just seeing a human and not understanding and then also appreciating all the requirements and all the different systems that is required to work for the body to work, for instance. They work independently, but they also work together. And that's an important difference to remember between what ecology and ecosystems are versus just plants and animals or the environment. Very importantly, not just for business, but for all human beings, is what ecosystems give us. On slide number 10, you guys can see that they are what we refer to as ecosystem services. Just like we have in business, goods and services, products that are produced and services that are rendered, the same happens from an ecosystem. So we start with key things of provisioning. On the right-hand corner on the top, you can see that nature and an ecosystem provides us with all kinds of things. First of all, food. Of course, no human being can survive without it. Then there's also raw materials that might be metals and agriculture, all of those kind of things that we get from nature, coal for energy. There's also medicinal resources, often the basis of where we find how antibiotics works, how medication works, and we source all of them from nature in order to make pharmaceutical materials. And then, of course, fresh water. As a bare minimum, all people need to have fresh water and food in order to survive. But as you can see, nature also has a lot of cultural things that they give to us. So they might be spiritual and religious values. You think about in some religions where being close to nature, in rivers, in water, is part of a spiritual and religious experience. There's also things like aesthetic values on the top right-hand corner that talks about just the beauty of a sunset, or seeing a lovely mountain range is something that gives us great pleasing in our well-being. Recreation and ecotourism is a specific thing that we also get from nature, and so is mental and physical health, where when we tend to need a little bit of a break, we tend to want to go find it outdoors and be around nature. I'm going to talk very briefly on what we call the regulatory systems. So these are the things that nature gives to us for free, unlike a service that would have in business, but things like air quality regulation. Nature provides us with free air. that is done mainly through plants, mainly through photosynthesis, that gives us all of these things that we require in order to live. So they regulate the quality of the air. If you have an area that's more wooded, the air quality is quite improved. Climate regulation, as we know, that's quite a hot topic at the moment with regards to climate change, is how things like greenhouse gases helps us to regulate our climate on our planet. So we are not too cold, not too hot, but just a very optimal temperature for humans and plants and animals to live. Nature also gives us water, so it regulates water. Things like swamps and wetlands and estuaries all help with water purification. Erosion regulation, things like soil and the quality of soil helps that there's not too much erosion. There's also water purification and waste treatment. Nature helps us, especially again through things like mangroves and swampy areas, helps to purify water and treats waste. There's also disease and pest regulation. There's a picture there of a little bird that obviously helps us to control the insect population, and that is all that ecology also provides us, is keeping certain species in check. Pollination, our picture of the bee, also quite a hot topic, especially in the European Union at the moment, and in the United States, is declining bee populations and how that affects our agricultural output, because of course we need pollination in order for a lot of our agriculture to sustain itself. And then of course we have things like the moderation of extreme events, with specific reference to like weather events. We know that things like leaves helps us to have big storm events, moderate that so entire coastlines don't wash away. I won't spend too much time on the supporting services, but that's just around how we recycle nutrients, especially in the soil. That helps us to have good agriculture. Photosynthesis, we briefly spoke about in our air quality regulation, and how soil is formed from decomposing. So that's just a nice summary of how the services that we get from nature, and of course on which a lot of businesses, most businesses and countries are built on. I'm showing a specific arrow here on slide number 10 at the link at the bottom of the slide. That is a very nice publication to have a look at. The World Wildlife Fund once a year produces a report called the Living Planet Report, and that has a look at not just species, but also all of these ecosystem services with some nice case studies and write-ups from across the world that you can go read up more on. Then I want to move on to slide number 11, and I'm hoping the slides are following as we're going. So we refer there to, I want to introduce you to something called the capitals model, which is for business students who are familiar with the concept of sustainability. Capitals is usually something we refer to as financial capital. But we're going to start unpacking this as the natural capital. That's also very often what we refer to as the environment or ecology. And as you can see on the diagram there, natural capital in this concept is broken up into three key components: natural resources, ecosystem services, and what they refer to as the beauty of nature, which are all part of what we've just discussed in the ecosystem services on the previous slide. So here on slide 10, you can see the start of a triangle forming. And I will tell you a little bit more on what's on top of that triangle. But what is here is at the base of this triangle is all the natural capital. All the things that we need to survive: food, water, wood and energy, metals for mining, all the services we get from nature, and of course all the aesthetic, the beauty of nature components. And we'll talk about the top bit of the pyramid a little bit later on. But that just links us nicely with our ecosystem services. Now that we've had a quick look at what we mean by ecology and what we mean by ecosystems, and also, well, why it's important, what services they provide for us, we need to have a quick look at impacts. And the session is too short to understand all of them, so I just want to have an understanding of very briefly of appreciating some of the impacts, and we're going to link it to what we call ecological credit and ecological debt. Let me first start with two key concepts on slide number 13. The first one we need to understand is something called an eco-footprint. You can see on the picture there, slide number 13, that an eco-footprint is typically made up of various kinds of footprints. The carbon footprint is the one that we know the best. It's the most commonly used one. It's quite popular at the moment as well, especially with regards to climate change discussions. But you also get, your entire footprint is also made up of things like forest land, grazing land, built up land, fishing grounds, and cropland. So the amount of land we need for animals to graze on that we consume, crops that need to grow in order for us to eat, fishing grounds in order for us to have fish, built up land for not just our houses, but also our businesses, our schools, our communities, and our regulatory bodies like governments, and then forest land for everything from paper to wood for materials, houses, furniture, all of that. So that's an eco footprint, and I'll share with you just now the formal definition of that. The second concept, still on slide 13, is something called biocapacity. And as you can see from the picture there, that's the ability of the planet to the capacity it has to give us all these goods and services and also deal with the waste that we create. And that might give the planet a bigger resilience or smaller resilience. Let me unpack these two concepts very briefly again. First of all, on slide number 14, we're going to look at eco-footprint. As you can see on slide number 14, we're referring there, the full term is actually ecological footprint. Now remember what we said, ecological refers to not just plants and animals and insects and all of that, water, soil, but also the interaction of the two, of all of these systems together. So it talks about our eco-footprint or our ecological footprint is the impact of human activities that are measured in terms of the land and the water that is required to produce the goods we consume, but to also deal with all the waste that we generate, the assimilation of them, the getting together of all of them. So it's the amount of environment that we need in order to produce the goods and services for our particular lifestyle. Now, of course, if you have a large house and a large business, and you eat a lot of fish, and you eat a lot of meat, and you eat and you use a lot of agriculture, or you produce a lot of carbon emissions, or you require a lot of paper, that all increases things like your footprint, and it might decrease your footprint if you look at things like recycling, reducing your impact on the environment, looking at your farming practices, fishing practices, building practices, and climate change practices. I want to move on now to the second part, still on slide number 14, that refers to our biocapacity. As indicated on the slide, the full term for that is actually biological capacity. So it simply says that it's the capacity of an ecosystem to generate what people demand from it. So we talk about, we produce biological materials that people use, from the food we eat, the water we drink, the paper we use, the wood we need, the bricks we build from soil, but also nature's ability to absorb the waste that we generate. We know, for instance, that carbon emissions is a byproduct of animals that breathe, including humans, but that is also an input into photosynthesis for the plants to work well. When we get too much waste produced, for instance, carbon dioxide, then we get into a problem where the biocapacity of the planet starts being reduced. So the biocapacity of a country or a planet or a company or a municipality can be changed depending on what kind of management schemes you had and what kind of extraction technologies you had. And that extraction could be for oil, for minerals, for agriculture. So I hope that gives you a better sense of two key concepts very important in ecology and ecosystem management. And that gets us then to slide number 15, where I want to talk a little bit around financial terms we're quite familiar with, and that is the concept of creditors and debtors. Now, we all have bank accounts, whether we understand finances really well, and you know that if you have a credit in your bank account, it means you have additional money on the account that you can use for other things, to buy materials, to invest in studies, to take a trip, to live your life. If you are unfortunately in debt on your bank account, it means you are needing to borrow from someone else, a bank, an institution. The same happens with ecology. And this is going to be an assessment on national ecological debt or credit. So we're looking at nations, at countries, and we're looking at ecological credits and debts in a map of countries. Very important here. Go and have a look at some of the good work that's done on the Footprint Network, which is the Global Footprint Network. And I've given the link there highlighted in the arrow on slide number 15. So let's start. We're going to be looking at countries. 1961. So it's a good few years ago, 50 or odd years ago. We could see that on our map there, most of the countries indicated there are indicated in green. If you look at the legend on the left-hand side, all the green ones means that all our biocapacity is larger than our ecological footprint. As we said, biocapacity is the ability of the planet to help generate all the products and the services that we require from it, but also deals with our waste. So if you have a lot of biocapacity, like for instance, you would have in Brazil, which is a very rich ecological country, lots of forests, lots of rich agricultural land, lots of fishing grounds, lots of water. So people there have quite a lot of the capacity of the ecology there, of the environment there, is to produce quite a lot of things. If you look at the pinkish red kind of countries listed on slide number 16, then you can see these are all because the footprint is larger than the biocapacity. We know, for instance, if we look at the United Kingdom, it's a fairly small country in terms of land mass, but it has quite a lot of people with very good living conditions and lifestyles. And of course, that small country does not have enough biological capacity or biocapacity to produce all the food and materials and building and consumption requirements for that nation. So they are in what we call ecological debt. So their footprint is larger than what their capacity is. We can see there all the green countries then, different shades of green indicates the different levels of capacity are higher than the footprint. All the countries shaded in pink or red indicate that your footprint is larger than your capacity. For in simple terms, you are using more resources than what your country can produce. If we move on to slide number 17, we see that that picture has dramatically changed in the last 50 years. So the latest one, this is again from the National Footprint Accounts done by the Global Footprint Network, and I've given the link below. You can see that the picture is very different. We have now significantly more red countries or pink countries which, as the legend below says, the ecological footprint is bigger than the capacity. My country down here in South Africa, you can see, is one of those countries. The amount of people as well as our consumption is too much for our country's resources. So is a lot of Asia, excluding Russia, as well as Europe, and of course, the United States, including Alaska on the left-hand side. We still have some green countries, or those countries who have more biological capacity than what they are currently using. And therefore, it means that they are still in ecological credit. But increasingly, the planet is going into ecological debt, i.e. using resources faster than what the nature can regenerate them. And this is what we refer to as ecological overshoot. But I won't spend too much time on that. You're welcome to go read up on it. I want to now introduce slide number 18. And the heading there says, why worry? And the why worry is relating to, well, so what? So what if we have a larger footprint compared to our capacity? The problem is, of course, as we decrease our ecological credit, like you would on your credit card, you get less and less and less credit. We're going to run into problems at some stage. What we refer to here is we can see the biocapacity is going down. Just the slides I'd shown you before on slide 17 and slide 16 shows that we have more countries in ecological debt, and therefore we know that the capacity of the planet is being reduced. That's from dealing with climate change and carbon emissions to agriculture and some areas, for instance, in Australia that have dead zones where the fertility of their soil is not optimal anymore. And you combine that with an increase in your ecological footprint. We are still on slide number 18. We're starting to see this gap growing. And this gap, unfortunately, is why we should worry, because we're going in the wrong direction. The gap is no longer between having more capacity from a biological perspective and have a smaller footprint, but this increase in the gap is going to lead to increased ecological instability, but also increased social instability. Now, you might ask, why social instability? But as we looked at, when we looked at ecosystem services, all the services we require from the ecosystem, like clean air, like clean water, like food, from minerals and metals, all of those things, if we start having problems with access to water, access to food, access to a responsible climate or a livable climate, that means we're going to have social instability. And there's already talk of things like the next wars would be around water, because of course, if we start running out of water, it would be quite a concern between countries. So we don't just worry about the ecosystem because we worry about plants and animals. The very basis of the ecosystem is on which we live and affects not just our livelihood, but also our lifestyle. And therefore, if we get increasing ecological instability, we're going to get increasing social instability. The additional concern here is, of course, that social instability is not by any measure equal. Poor people are significantly more affected by ecological instability than rich people. If we run out of water and you have access to finances and you have money, you don't need to go to the local river in order to get your fresh water requirements for drinking, for cooking, for bathing, for washing. You can go to the local supermarket to buy bottled water. Poor people, which unfortunately the large majority of the world still is, don't have that luxury. So this social instability is also an inequality concern because of the difference between poor people who grow their own crops, have small little subsistence agriculture, are required to get their own food directly from nature. They are the guys first affected compared to people in richer environments who buy these things and can buy them from other countries. I want to move on to slide number 19, and it has a little cartoon on there that shows that human demands, you can see the plug, the electrical plug is quite big compared to the very small plug in the wall where the Earth's resources are represented. And I want to talk about a quote from one of the previous United Nations General Secretaries, Mr. Kofi Annan. And he spoke at the World Summit for Sustainable Development in 2002. It's a conference, it's a UN conference that happens every decade, every 10 years. It was coincidentally held in my country, in South Africa, in Johannesburg in 2002. And Mr. Annan spoke of failed policies at the opening of that conference. And he talked about, and I will read the quote on slide number 19, "Let us face the uncomfortable truth. The model of development we are accustomed to has been fruitful for the few, but flawed for the many. A path to prosperity that ravages the environment and leaves the majority of humankind behind in squalor will soon prove to be a dead-end road for everyone." And we can start seeing that as our demands, as our human demands increase, the resources of the planet remains fairly constant because there's only one planet and there's only one amount that we can get. But of course, our capacity from the planet perspective is decreasing because of things like pollution. So even though the water is there, it might be so polluted that that resource is not actually capable of providing us with drinking, with washing, with cooking requirements. So we need to start worrying about this increase in our ecological debt, as you would worry about any increase in debt. But now I want to talk about, well, with all of these things as background, let's look at some key responses. I'm on slide number 20, and it refers to business and ecology. And we're going to be looking at what some of the changes have been and some of the approaches have been. Again, it's a very short session, so we will be doing this at a very high level. There are millions more examples, but we will focus on a key few ones. And the first one is because business has started looking at sustainability. Sustainability is a key term in the corporate environment and increasingly so in a government environment as well. And in business, we talk about the triple bottom line. We talk about three key components on slide number 21. That says that we have social sustainability, environmental sustainability, and economic sustainability that we should be concerned about. In business, we're quite familiar with the normal bottom line, the financial or economic bottom line, i.e. how much money or resources, financial resources, are required or can be produced from a specific project or initiative. Social sustainability are all the specific things we look at, what we need from society, humans with skills to contribute to the economy and to business. And environmental sustainability is our key focus for today around the ecosystem requirements for us to still have clean air, clean water, access to food, minerals, and all of that. So that's the traditional way we looked at the triple bottom line. These three circles were seen as equal, and the balance between all three of them is seen as sustainable practices. But if you look at slide number 22, our next slide, you will see that that has started to take on a different meaning in a broader sense in the last few years, maybe the last 5 years, 10 years or so. And that changes the three circles being of equal size, with sustainability being this magical component in the middle, to understanding that the three circles are actually not necessarily equal. On slide 22, I'm still there, you can see that the largest circle is our environmental circle, and that's our ecology, because these are all the ecosystem services that we require not just to survive, but also to grow our economy with, build products and create build products and create services. The second biggest circle is our social sustainability circle, because of course you need people, you need a healthy society, good regulators, a conducive environment from society in order to run your business or contribute to the economy. So for instance, if you have lack of water or limited access to water on your environmental, your green circle, people are, first of all, from a labor perspective, unable to function optimally because they are thirsty, they might not be able to wash themselves, therefore diseases are increased, therefore absenteeism are increased. And that, of course, impacts our red circle in the middle, our business, which leads to concerns for our economy. I want to get back to our capitals model, and that's on the next slide, slide 23. Now, I'd shown you before the natural capital component, not just our ecosystem services, but also the actual resources that we use and the aesthetics of nature. As you can see from this pyramid, that the top bit of our pyramid is the built capital. I'm on slide number 23. Built capital and our financial capital, we know, is there in order to help us develop our economy, help us build our businesses. So these are all the capitals that are traditionally important to business. The buildings we have, the infrastructure we have, the money we make, all the man-made stuff. But of course, you can't get from natural resources to actual financial or built capital without people. And that is where our middle component of our triangle comes in. And that's our human and our social capital. You need people with certain sets of skills, certain education, certain abilities, good health, in order to translate natural resources like metals into man-made capital like money, equipment, information, or infrastructure. Gold in the ground, for instance, is what we get from nature, but it can't contribute to our economy without people digging for the gold, making things out of it, producing and contributing to the economy. So that's why our previous slide with the big circles at the bottom is that all of us are based on the natural environment. We live on it, we feed from it, we eat from it, we breathe from it, we get all our resources from it, we build our businesses on it. But of course, you need the social capital, the human capital, with people with skills, good health, good well-being, in order to create your financial or built capital. So I hope that makes sense of slide number 23 a little bit. Before I end off, there's a couple of examples I want to show on how this has been applied in business a little bit. And there's a nice, lovely term called biomimicry. Bio, you can imagine, comes from the word biology. Mimicry is the word we use for mimicking, for copying, for mirroring. So on the left-hand side of slide number 24, you can see that we've got two pictures of birds. The one is a big raptor, a big predatory bird. And you see how that is used, for instance, it's in flight. Now, we have learned, of course, from birds how they fly in order to understand how we can develop airplanes. The first airplanes were developed from the same kind of concept of wings and the motion from birds. So that was a very basic sense of how we've mimicked nature and learned from nature in order to grow a business, an industry, and our economy. The bottom picture of the bird is actually a small little kingfisher bird. You can see it's got a very long beak. It's quite streamlined. This was very useful when the Japanese produced their bullet train, which you can see on the bottom right-hand side of the slide, number 24. Initially, when the bullet train was made, very high-speed train in Japan, they had a lot of problems with sound and streamlining that bullet train. They then looked to nature to see how nature streamlines itself. The kingfisher bird can go and fish in water with making almost no ripple at all, does it very softly. And they learned from how the kingfisher operated in its hunting behavior. They designed their bullet train on that in order to reduce the noise and the streamlining of that train. On slide 25, I can show you two more examples. The top left-hand side is a termite mound. So termites are insects, usually in grasslands and savanna. We get them quite a lot in Africa, but on other continents as well. And these insects build these big mounds or soil structures that they do by digging out. What they found is inside those structures, it's always cool. So they use that to design a building in Zimbabwe, in Harare, the capital of Zimbabwe, which is our neighboring country and has gone through some exciting changes in the last week or so. And this is one of their shopping centers. It's the Eastgate Mall, which they have businesses in as well. And they designed, based on how a termite mound is designed by termites, they designed the shopping center in Zimbabwe to also help with cooling of the building. So they looked at how airflow worked inside a termite mound, and they copied the same principle on designing the outside and inside sections of this building that requires no air conditioning, with air conditioning units, but is natural air conditioning. And the last example I want to show at the bottom of slide number 25 is a very funny looking fish. And that funny looking fish is called a boxfish. Despite its funny shape, it is very fast and swims really well in water. They used this design when designing one of the automotives that you can see on the picture on the right-hand side. I'm still on slide number 25. So they looked at how you could have a small boxy car, but with lots of space inside because the interior is quite large, but still have it streamlined so airflow goes over it. So there's still good energy efficiency when it comes to fuel consumption. And you can see how the shape of that fish impacted the design of the shape of that vehicle. That's just a very, very brief to some examples of biomimicry. There's also a concept called cradle to cradle, which has been instrumental in how we've started developing things called the circular economy. It's a concept developed by an American architect called William McDonough and his business partner, Mr. Michael Braungart, who is a German chemist. And they produced a book called Cradle to Cradle, where they explained this idea, and they work with two cycles around eco-effectiveness versus eco-efficiency. Now, of course, in business, we focus on efficiency mainly, but they look at it from a design perspective because they say, and I've got the definitions there on slide 27, eco-efficiency is what we usually look for, and that reduces or minimizes our unintended or negative consequences on things that we produce and things that we consume. So we want to build cars that are more eco-efficient, therefore produces less fuel in order to drive. But they focus on a concept called eco-effectiveness. And that is about how do we maximize industry's ability to support natural and the human world. They work in two cycles that you can see on slide number 28. The first one on the left-hand side, the green cycle, refers to the biological cycle. These are all things we learned in primary school, how you have in the soil all different nutrients that the plants require in order to live. The plants then become food for things like a bunny or an animal. When animals die, the decomposers, all the insects and all the microorganisms in the soil decomposes the animals, and that becomes nutrients again. And that's always a closed cycle. In nature, there's no such a thing as waste. Some things waste is simply an input into a new cycle. They've done that with the technical cycle as well, which is on slide 28 still, on the right-hand side, the blue cycle. And that talks about when we assemble and manufacture, for instance, a television. We look at all the raw materials that comes in and is required for it to be manufactured in the assembly line in the factory to have a product. In that case, in our example's case, it's a television, and that gets used with a customer who buys the television. Usually, we then throw these televisions away. But now in a cradle-to-cradle concept, we are trying to think, well, how do we take this television after it's been used back and break it up into its smaller components that can go back into manufacturing? And that has led to a rather new phenomenon in the last 5 or 10 years called the circular economy, and especially in the last 5 years has taken on significant importance and interest in the business cycles, which if you look at slide number 29, it talks about moving from a linear economy where we use natural resources and we go with the plain model of taking, making, and disposing, therefore creating a lot of waste, to a circular economy. And they've got the similar 2 cycles there. This is from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, who do a lot of good work on circular economy, a lot of resources you can get from there. And the one is biological materials, which is similar to the cradle-to-cradle green cycle, where what we can make, we can consume, but it can go back to enrich the soil and the planet and the ecology, to technical materials. What we make can be used, and how can those components be returned again so they can be remade? And that leads us to our circular economy, where if we look in the biological cycle, and we're on slide 30, you can see that biological materials can be decomposed and go back into the cycle infinitely. And if we can start looking at technical cycle, our technosphere, we can look at recycling, and not the traditional recycling, but really recycling components in that to prolong a product's life cycle and make the components come back to be disassembled and recollected. I've given an example on slide number 31, and it's a very nice example for especially business students. You can go read the article in Green Biz. I've given the link at the bottom of the slide 31, that talks about all the role players and the people who could drive this circular economy. And you can go read up on all of these components. Due to time, I want to finish up with another component, and that is our One Report, where we've started seeing businesses responding to not just producing annual reports, but looking at things like an integrated report separate from a sustainability report, where we're looking at how do we integrate financial and non-financial reporting requirements for businesses and organizations. And the very premise of integrated reporting comes from, again, looking at 6 different capitals: the financial capital on slide number 33, the manufactured capital, the human capital, the intellectual capital, natural capital, and social capital. We are focusing for today's session on the natural capital, and that is our input into how the business model can create and sustain value, not just in the short, the medium, and the long term. And therefore, natural capital is now becoming a key focus for businesses, not just to measure, but to also report on. And you can see in South Africa on our stock exchange, the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, it is a requirement for all listed companies to produce these reports and refer to the 6 different capitals. And that is publicly available. You can go and look at any of our listed companies, from Anglo American to Nedbank to other large companies, on how they use natural capital in order to grow and sustain their business. And then I want to finish off with things that you might be familiar with: the new Sustainable Development Goals that started in 2016, and with a 15-year deadline will run out in 2020, where we've set some big global goals for the world. There's a few that directly relate to ecology. Zero hunger on slide number 34. You can see that obviously without an ecosystem and a functioning ecosystem, we can't produce food, and therefore we won't be able to meet our zero hunger target. The same with target number 3, which talks about good health and well-being. An environment that is full of pollution is not conducive to good health or to well-being of people. The other direct one is number 6 of the Sustainable Development Goals, which talks about clean water and sanitation. Number 12 is responsible consumption and production. Of course, directly what we consume from the ecosystem is impacted by this SDG or Sustainable Development Goal. Climate action, given how the climate is regulated through ecosystem services, is directly linked again to the ecology. So is life below water, life on land. These are all direct links indicated in the black dotted lines. But of course, all the Sustainable Development Goals are linked to the ecosystem indirectly as well. Zero poverty, which is our goal that we want to reach by 2030, we cannot get to zero poverty if we don't look at the inequalities with regards to resources and consumption and use, and especially if our ecosystem deteriorates, as we showed in the slide, with declining biocapacity, so the poor are affected even more. That links directly with SDG number 10, which talks about how we plan to reduce inequalities in the world. So we have that to consider, as well as our gender equality. In most cases, especially in poor countries, there is women and girls are usually the ones going to fetch water, being closely associated with the ecology. Good education and quality education is, of course, key to how we're going to develop our economies and develop our businesses. Affordable and clean energy is what we get from ecosystems, from wind, from sun. Decent work and economic growth, and we've started to see how ecosystems support these works and jobs. The industry, innovation and infrastructure, cities, peace, justice, and of course we're seeing an increase in partnerships around the ecology. So with that, I want to finish off my webinar. I see there are some questions coming in. I will leave you with the last slide, slide 35. So if we don't get to all the questions today, you are always welcome to contact me on anything. Let me start with some of your questions here that I've got. The first question talks about, are there any countries where ecology is priority? I think that's a separate question. I'm not sure. I think they're all together. So one of the countries I like to follow as an example where ecology is quite important is a developing country, is Costa Rica. It's a small country in Latin America. They do phenomenal things around ecosystems and biodiversity management, and I would encourage you guys to go and have a look at where ecology is really prioritized. From having areas where they do not allow mining or agriculture, and they've actually got a system where they work with farmers and people in order to pay them for keeping the ecosystem services up and running. There's also some really good work you can go and see on the Living Planet report I had referred to you guys to previously on the link. There's some nice case studies on where ecology has been prioritized, not necessarily at a country level, but definitely at regions or specific cases. So I think that would be a good one to start with. Then I've got another question that says, suppose I'm the owner of a shop with ecological products. Are there any ways how to lower prices for customers? In Russia, the more product is ecological, the more expensive it is. And not many people are ready to buy such expensive goods. I agree with you. This is a fairly new concept because we're only understanding our impacts on the ecology at now. We didn't plan to cause climate change. We didn't plan to cause pollution. All of these things happened as unintended consequences. So like in normal business terms, you always have an uptake of things that is going to be more expensive. You think about when solar panels and solar geysers started coming out. They were very expensive, but as you get maturity of a product or a service, that becomes more affordable. The same happened with smartphones, cellular phones, where the initial ones were very expensive, but now because there's a lot of uptake and only early adopters would initially buy them, now we've had beyond the early adopters, it's starting to, so that will also change. What of course helps with the product of ecological products, you think about global companies like The Body Shop or Natura. They use quite a lot of ecological, responsibly sourced materials. And that is mainly because of their customer awareness as well. So the small shop owner, you start not only working with customers and consumers who are more aware of impacts and would like to support more responsible ones, but businesses can also start forming strategic alliances with larger businesses that are looking for a more responsible supply chain. There's a lovely example of a small company called MAS, M-A-S, in Indonesia, where they work with ecological products. They're actually based in Sri Lanka, sorry, not Indonesia. And of course, in Sri Lanka, similar to what it would be in Russia and in South Africa, the affordability of responsible practices and ecological products is not very high. So what they did is they didn't look at their local market. They formed strategic partnerships with companies like Victoria's Secret, like Marks and Spencer's, like Nike, to make products. So they do garments, they do materials, and sell it to these companies who already have a fairly good market and have increasingly requirements from their customers and regulators based in Europe and the United States to have more responsible products. So that would be a way for you, or for how to deal with the expense things, is if your market is not quite susceptible to it, can you look at forming partnerships with other people who might be interested in those services? But you can also, of course, start small. Ecological things could be quite how you can have local services and local produce, and have linkages with local farmers and local produce. The next question goes around, does ecology of the country strongly depend on the mentality of the nation? That's an interesting question. Of course, it's not just mentality, but in business terms, we talk about leadership as well. Just a company is responsible for creating the strategic vision and alignment of that company. The same happens with leadership in countries as well. So I do think there is perhaps an understanding the mentality of a nation would impact their perception of ecology. For the countries who live quite closely to the land and on the land, if you think about in Africa and South America, there is sometimes a strong bond, at least at a regional level or local level, of their dependency on nature, and therefore their focus on ecological survival is probably a little bit more. So I would agree that there is probably a nice link between the mentality of a nation and the ecology, how strong the ecology of that country is viewed. The next question is, how can we prevent running non-ecological businesses? Are there any companies like Greenpeace that control the ecology of business? In Russia, there's a problem with garbage disposal. There are incinerator plants, but they produce too much toxic fumes and pollute the air. How should the country solve the ecological problem? I think some of the things that we looked at there in a circular economy would be a starting point. So how do I take out harmful chemicals in the way I produce? So that means you're going to look at how your system is designed, what kind of raw materials you use, what processes you use, so that you can go to a system of reusing all of those once they've been used. Go and have a look at readings around cradle to cradle. You don't have to buy the book. All of that is available online, but also the circular economy. There's some lovely examples on how waste management has been improved. The Green Biz link I'd sent you on the slides, that will also give you a nice insight on how a recycling company uses waste. The next question is on which countries are considered to have the best ecology. I think we can have a starting point is the countries that are showed in green, the ecological creditors. They have good ecology that's not necessarily based on good practices and management practices. It might just be because their ecological footprint is lower. The concern is obviously as we're trying to get people to better lifestyles and better standard of living, we might find a point where our impact, our eco footprint might be higher if we don't look at what we consume. So it's not just the amount, but it's also the things that we consume. Basic things like less plastic would be a very good starting point, reusing materials over and over and over again. So there are some countries that are considered to have, good ecology. Costa Rica just do phenomenal things with how they manage ecosystems. They're one of the few countries, developing countries, who've set themselves, for instance, a carbon neutral target in the next few years and making great progress on it. So again, go and have a look at that. The next question is, how do countries help each other in supporting ecology? And I think that's key. That was also on the last slide on the Sustainable Development Goals, where we need to partner with things. Ecosystems don't always follow political boundaries or business boundaries, as we can see with climate change and water resources. So, of course, there's a big requirement for companies and countries to help each other to support that. And again, increasingly looking at circular economies between countries are very important. So it would be important to start seeing how we introduce these things into trade agreements, whether they bilateral or multilateral agreements. I'd like to start seeing large regional trade agreements start taking this on. There's some really good work that's being started by the World Bank that you can also go read up on ecosystems. There's quite a lot that's happening around investment and how large investment, especially big funds, provide money looking at environment and ecological impact before they give out money. So that's one of the ways how countries can help each other, is not just looking at investing in financial terms, but also looking at how do we benefit nature and the ecology. I've got a question here on, do Greenpeace and WWF exist in South Africa? What are the main companies that are responsible for ecological projects? Are there any world famous ones? So yes, we have Greenpeace and WWF in South Africa. You can also go look online at wwf.panda.org and greenpeace.co.za. They've got some lovely examples on projects and initiatives where not just companies, but also municipalities and cities are partnering with both these organizations in order to improve their eco footprint and their management of ecology. So go and have a look at those links. I'm going to deal with two more questions, and then I think we probably need to finish up. The second last one is, do you think it is possible for all companies to become ecologically friendly? Yes, I do. I don't think it is something that you can do immediately, but I think it is like most things for companies, a journey. It's a process. You have to start basic, one step at a time, and start just understanding what your impact on the ecology is. What resources are you consuming? What wastes are you producing? And then start looking at what might be low-hanging fruits, the easy things to fix. If you've got a good recycling system in your municipality or in your country, use that as a starting point. If you've got a lot of specific waste, or you're consuming a lot of something, you can consider, can you reduce that? At our business school, for instance, as you can imagine, with most academic institutions, we used to consume quite a lot of paper for course materials and corporate programs and that. And then we started in 2013 to say, how do we introduce electronic modes only? This webinar is one example. Instead of everyone coming together in a classroom, we can just stream information. So you have to start there. So I do believe companies can become ecologically friendly. Even some of the traditionally quite destructive industries like mining, they might not be completely ecologically friendly, but we're seeing phenomenal work being done in the mining sector around rehabilitation of ecosystems. There's some great initiatives that you guys can read up on things called biological banking or biobanking that is increasingly happening between large investors. And there's increasingly funds available because of the Sustainable Development Goals for companies large and small, countries large and small, to access finance and expertise and shared experiences through some of these global initiatives. And my last question is, are there any spheres of business where business cannot be related to ecology? Probably directly, yes. But I think indirectly, as we know, even though we manage businesses with silo departments, every department, no matter how independently they function, have some role to play in the overall performance of a company. And therefore, if you look at what companies are starting to report on, the 6 capitals I shared with you with regards to integrated reporting, and go and have a look at some of the good integrated reports from companies on all of those business units, all of those divisions ultimately impact on how the company performs. And if we start understanding that performance is not just financial performance, but also what we manufacture, our social performance, capital performance, our human capital performance, our natural capital performance, our intellectual capital performance, all of those things would play a role. So for me, I think they probably won't be any spheres of business where they cannot relate to ecology, because at the very basic level, all businesses use people, and all people require food, water, and clean air to be the most productive. And because of those 3 things, all people require the ecology, therefore all business require the ecology. I think those are some of the questions we'll get to for now. I will let you guys go, and thank you for a lovely hour or so. I look forward to hearing from any further questions, and good luck in your journey towards more responsible ecological practices. Thanks very much.